the 39th chapter of Genesis. And it is a familiar story, but it's a part of the familiar story we don't always think too much about. It's a story of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Remember how the story begins. Joseph is born into a household with 11 brothers, but he is the favorite one. He's not the oldest or the second oldest. He's way down near the end. And I think, well, I'm sure you all know that Joseph is sort of a stand-in for the nation of Israel, which also is sort of one of the little brothers in the region, as the power dynamics go at the time. We don't need that. And so a lot of what happens to Joseph is a mirror of what happens to the Jews. I know you knew that. Well, Joseph was the favored son. Where have we heard that before? Joseph was given a special coat, a symbol of his father's love. And his brothers didn't like this, so they ganged up on him one day when he was out in the field, and they put him in a pit. And they waited, and they weren't sure. They thought maybe they would just leave him down there. So they took his coat and they tore it, and they put some animal blood on it, and they took it back to their father, and they said, an animal got him. And so one of the brothers, this is kind of sitting heavy on his conscience, so he said, we can't just leave him in the pit. So when a band of Ishmaelite traders was passing by, remember Ishmael? Right? He was another son of Jacob. He was the one born to Hagar, the slave girl, ahead of Isaac. And he was pushed out into the wilderness with his mom. So here the Ishmaelite traders come. They weren't traders. They traded stuff. And so they sold their brother to their stepbrother. And he brought his stepbrother to Egypt and sold him. And so it was bought by a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar was the captain of the guard. And that is where our story begins. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From that time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. And with him there, he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and good looking. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, with me here, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Then she kept his garment until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came into me to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He remained there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love, gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in prison. And whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. A lot of ups and downs in Joseph's life. First, he gets the coat, and he is the favored son, and then he's in a pit. And then he's out of the pit with his stepbrothers on his way to Egypt, and then he's sold into slavery. But he's sold into slavery to Potiphar, and Potiphar can discern that God is with Joseph. Everything Joseph touches seems to go well. So little by little, he makes Joseph the head of his household. He's back up on top. And then the whole thing with Potiphar's wife, who lies about him and steals. And where is he? He's back down into the jail. The same word for pit is used for the jail, because that's what jails often were a pit. And then while he's there, God blesses him, and he gets to know the jailer, and the jailer gets to confide in him and rely on him. I don't know what he was, but he was good at it. He could talk anybody into believing in him. Now, it is unheard of course, for a slave to become the second in command. It just doesn't happen. But if we remember that this story is actually about Israel, we remember how the ups and the downs of their life together as people. One minute they're God's chosen nation, and then they are enslaved, and then they're delivered, and then they're in the desert, and then they're in the promised land. Right? And then Assyria and Babylon come and capture them. And then they return. That is their life as well. But it's also, in some regards, our lives too, because we have ups and downs. We have things that happen to us. I'm sure I've told the story before, but I had been falsely accused. And there's something about that is really hard to overcome. There's a piece of me that will always be angry about that. Much as I can say I've left it behind and I've moved on and my life now is so much better than it ever was, there's still a part of me that remembers. And so what I can say and what the Jews could say and what Joseph could say is that God is with us, no matter what. In the good times and the bad times, God's presence is with us. God fills us with God's Spirit. And sometimes that Spirit brings joy, and sometimes it helps us to get through the low places. I remember being in 4th grade, and my parents moved from Minnesota, northern Minnesota, to northern Michigan. When I was in 6th grade, I found them. No. I went to a new school and had to make new friends. I was still a little sad because I had a lot of great friends. And all of my new friends wanted to see if they could beat me up. They wanted to know where I fit in on the pecking order in the UP. That's what it's like if you're a boy. You get in a lot of fights to prove who you are. And I got in a lot of fights. And I didn't make friends real easily. And the friends my mom and dad wanted me to have from church were not the friends I would have chosen. But I was good at sports. The first inkling I had of that was the school, the elementary school, had a ping pong table. And one of the teachers at school took pity on me because I didn't fit in too well. And he asked me after school one day if I'd like to stay and play some ping pong. And I wasn't very good at ping pong, but I thought I'd give it a try. And he showed me how to hold the paddle a special way, which gave me a great advantage over the other 4th graders. And I soon was the best ping pong player in my class. In case you want to know what that special grip is, I will show it to you. And I played a lot of ping pong. Instead of going out at recess and hanging out on the monkey bars and getting into fights, I would stay in and play ping pong. And I developed a wicked backhand serve with lots of topspin, unhittable most days. And I remember at the end of the year there would be a tournament. And even though I was a 4th grader, I had risen up to be one of the best players in the school. And I remember going into the bathroom at the elementary school and saying a prayer, "Dear God, help me whip the pants off of this 6th grader, but not so bad that he beats me up later." And sure enough, I won. I won as a 4th grader the South Range Elementary School Ping Pong Championship. And what I learned is that's how God works. You pray and you ask God to do something for you, and then it happens. Until it doesn't. I think many people read this story of Joseph and they believe that somehow God was with Joseph and like made all the ducks line up and made everything great and made him look better than he was. I don't think that's true. I don't think God works that way. I think that Joseph was a person of high integrity, a person who was well loved as a kid, who had a lot of confidence, who had a great deal of gifts and talents to share. And even when he fell down, because of who he was able to not take it personally. He was able to keep the big picture in mind and to continue to use his gifts to help out in whatever ways he could. And it made him ultimately the second in command in Egypt. And it was because of his abilities and gifts that he was able to tell Pharaoh there's going to be a famine. And there will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And if you save up enough in these 7 years, you'll have enough in the last 7 years. And he did that. And Pharaoh was extremely pleased with him. And he eventually reconciled with all his brothers. He forgave them. And he welcomed them with open arms to Egypt. And it was good with the Jews in Egypt until it wasn't. A new king, a new Pharaoh in town who didn't know Joseph, didn't know what he had done, didn't care, thought the Jews posed a threat and enslaved him. I mean, this is what life is like. We can't control the ups and downs. We can't make the path straight. We can pray that God makes them straight. But even more than that, we can pray that God is with us, even when they're not. Our church here, King of Glory, while we've been way up here, a couple thousand members, 500 kids in Sunday school, I'm sure many of you remember those days. And now you have me as a pastor, and we are down here. But we're going to keep our integrity and use the gifts that we have and the talents that we have, and we are going to make something. We are going to be the church here that God has called us to be. And God is going to be with us. Amen.